Pastor Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Rox. Something I forgot to mention with the leaders gathering, that's this Friday, just let us know if you're coming. It would just be helpful to know how many are coming. Everyone is welcome if you're interested in getting more involved in ministry and leadership, but especially be great to have most of our leaders there. So let us know you're coming though. There's a sign-up sheet for it. That'd be great. Wonderful. Well, welcome again today, and welcome to part 6 of this series titled Leadership. Leadership. And today, my topic is the visionary leader, and we're basing it on Nehemiah, largely in chapter 2, the visionary leader. Now, let me make the suggestion that there was a reason why Nehemiah was skilled in leadership. And actually, to be honest, out of any chapter in the Bible, I do not know of one more filled with principles of visionary leadership anywhere in the Bible. It's only a short chapter, absolutely loaded with interesting principles in leadership. One of the reasons he was so skilled in leadership was his opportunity to observe King Artaxerxes. The Persian Empire was massive, and this king had to manage it. Have a look at the vastness of the kingdom here with this map. In the north, it's as far as what has been at different times known as Russia. In the south, you've got well down the Nile River there. Moving across to the west, you're into Europe. Moving across to the east, you're into India. It's a vast empire, and it was a stable empire too, about 220 years. And generally, the kings ruling reigned for about 20 years each on average. So, it was a stable kingdom, a well-managed kingdom. So you can imagine Nehemiah is the cupbearer to the king, King Artaxerxes. Now, we're talking about the cupbearer, by the way. They're not just someone who tastes the wine to make sure it's not poisoned. The cupbearer was supposed to be well educated and supposed to be a resource for the king. If the king needed information about something and didn't have it, the cupbearer was one of those knowledgeable people that was supposed to be, in many sense, a support to the leadership of the king. Nehemiah observes how Artaxerxes manages this vast kingdom, and I think he learnt a lot from him. As well, of course, from God himself, because he was a very godly man, Nehemiah. Let's have a look at the reign of these various kings here for a moment. So Cyrus the Great, he conquered the Babylonian kingdom, and he seemed to do it fairly easily. They just surrendered to him. They saw his vast forces, they surrendered. Cambyses was his son. He conquered Egypt, which was probably after Babylon. Babylon at the time was the second most powerful nation in the world, and Cambyses conquered it pretty easily. Now, we know their names a little bit, and Darius the First especially, because of the prophet Daniel. He had dealings with these kings. And then we move into Xerxes the First. Remember, he is the king who marries Esther. We have already had a look at him. And now that brings us up to Artaxerxes. And so you can get an idea there of the reign of these various Persian kings. Well, let's dig into the passage of Nehemiah. Chapter 2, 4-6, it says this. The king said to me, "What is it you want?" Then I prayed to the God of heaven, and I answered the king, "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah, where my fathers are buried, so I can rebuild it." Then the king, with the queen sitting beside him, it's important to have the first lady on side, asked me, "Well, how long will your journey take? When will you get back?" And it pleased the king to send me, so I set a time. Now, I know it mentions in that passage, Nehemiah shoots up a quick prayer, probably a silent one, just before he asks the king's permission. But if you read chapter 1, you realise he was praying and fasting for about 4 months before he finally asked the king. He bathed that request in prayer. I'm not going to make the point of prayer about Nehemiah today, but he certainly was a man of prayer. He knew the importance and power of prayer. But what I want to suggest here, I think Nehemiah heard the terrible state of Jerusalem. That although the temple had been built, the walls were broken down, the city is rubble. And so there's been a remnant has returned, but they need leadership. And so his heart is burdened by this, and I think he starts to see in his mind a vision of the city rebuilt. He sees a vision of the walls rebuilt. The walls are so important because at that time, a city Really, if it didn't have solid walls, it could be prey even to bandits. So solid, fortified walls were very important for the establishment of a city. So let me suggest this. Number one, the effective leader receives a vision from God. Number one, the effective leader receives a vision from God. By the way, I should point out, if Nehemiah was selfish, he could have heard that report and been a little troubled by it. But the fact is, it was much more comfortable for him to stay in the capital, Susa. He had wealth, prestige, servants, palace, lived in the palace, luxury, great career. Why bother leaving? Life's good. But he had a deep heart for his people. He cared about them. He wanted to make a difference. Let me give you an idea of what he might have seen in his mind. Let's have a look at this wall here. So it's not the actual wall, because of course that's buried under a lot of dirt. I've seen some ruins of the original wall, but it would have looked like this sort of look when it was completed. And of course it went around the entire circumference of Jerusalem, and parts of the wall were as wide as 2 metres because of armed people, soldiers, being there on the top of the wall to protect the city. Now Nehemiah had a vision in his mind of a solid fortified wall and a rebuilt city, and he saw that, thought about that, believed in that. Let me talk about the power of vision just for a moment, bringing it into a much more modern setting. About 5 years ago, I was at a conference at New Hope Baptist, and the keynote speaker was Craig Groeschel. He pastors a very effective church in America, and he came out to share some leadership stuff with us. And one of the stories he told was fantastic. It was a visionary leadership type of story. And he just mentioned that one of his young guys on the tech team, not employed by the church or anything, just a part of the tech team, a guy called Bobby Grunewald, he was just standing at an airport. And whilst he stood at the airport, he watched everyone on their phones. This is in the early 2000s. He saw everyone on their phones, and he felt like it was a revelation from God. He felt the Lord say, as if he asked Bobby a question. Bobby, wouldn't it be great if the Bible was accessible on the phone? And he thinks about it and thinks, I've got the skills to do this, sort this out. So he developed a program. And to clarify, in 2007, he hears that Apple were going to release their 2008 phone with a heap of phone app options. He submitted his, the YouVersion Bible app. They accepted it. They included it. Over that weekend, Saturday, Sunday, that Bible app got 80,000 downloads over the weekend. And so the senior minister heard about it, Craig Groeschel. He said, we'd like you to join our staff full-time, please, immediately. And so he did. And, today, it's only one of several Bible apps too. There's other popular ones as well. This is the biggest one. But, over the next years up to today, it's around about 500,000 people around the world have that Bible app. It's around about 500 million people, 500 million, let me say that again. About 500 million people have that Bible app. So 500,000, you've got the number anyway. I'll keep mucking it up. 500 million, okay? 500 million. So you've got an extraordinary number of people have it, but as well it's in about 1,500 languages as well. That's how accessible it is. Amazing stuff. Visionary stuff. It all started with a little vision. He's just there standing at the airport and he feels like God lays a vision on his heart. And look what happens with it. Next portion, Nehemiah 2:7, it says, I also said to him, if it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates so that they will provide me safe conduct until I arrive in Judah. And may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber and make beams for the gates and for the citadel by the temple and for the city wall and for the residence I will occupy. And because of the gracious hand of my God upon me, the king granted my requests. So I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry with me. You got the idea? He's got the documentation of this vast kingdom to actually use any resources of the kingdom he needs to re-establish the walls and indeed the city. I want to make this suggestion, number 2. The effective leader knows how to resource the vision. The effective leader resources the vision. The effective leader resources the vision. Let me give you an illustration here. I remember at one of the Crossway conferences, we had this speaker from the United States quite a few years back, and he's a great guy, actually. He was very funny to listen to as a speaker. But he was pastoring a big church in America, and he tells a story about one day he is off to Bill Hybels' church, Willow Creek Community Church. Very, very big church, very effective church. And there's a place where you're kind of driving into it, and you're up on the hill, and there's like a viewing point where you can look over the complex of Willow Creek Community Church. And he said he parked his car there, and he just looked out over it. He sees this vast auditorium. He sees all the other ministry buildings just all over the property, this huge lake that they would baptise hundreds of people every year in. And he said, I started to cry. I was just overwhelmed. I thought, look at God's blessing over this place. It's just extraordinary. I've been to a lot of Willow Creek conferences over the years, actually. And one of the things that they would sometimes do, mostly actually, after the conference, after 3 days of conference or whatever, they'd do a little panel at the end and you could ask them questions. I think every year, if Bill Hybels was there, they'd always ask, someone from the floor would always ask the question, how do you resource your extraordinary vision? How do you resource your vision? And Bill would give a very simple but profound answer. He simply would say this: we teach tithing in our church. We teach tithing. And he would go on to say that almost everything has been funded through simply teaching this principle of tithing. As people tithe, God blesses them financially, and we never seem to not have the resources we need. And they do some extraordinary stuff. I remember one time when Bill, this was probably the latter years, the last 15 years or so, Bill got a vision about actually doing a care centre. Crossway ended up being influenced by him and ended up doing one as well. What do I mean? They decided they wanted to create something for the poor. And so they built a building that it was like a clothing store, and people from the church would give their only slightly used items. And they set it all out nicely, but people could just go and they didn't purchase the things, they could just pick them up for free. They did the same with food. Some of the food was donations, but also they just bought a bunch of food and stocked it. As well, they talked with an optometrist, a dentist, a doctor, a couple of mechanics, and they would donate some of their time. By the way, because you go to a dentist or a doctor in America, it costs you a fortune, mate. You don't get any government support. You pay the full price. And so they set all of that up. And I still remember Bill telling one of the stories about this young single mum. And she'd been ripped off by mechanics time and time again. And she took her car, which was a pretty old one, took it in, and a couple of mechanics serviced it all. The church paid for the new tyres and the parts, and she got this car all done, free of charge. She couldn't believe it. I can't believe people are so nice. I can't believe they're so nice. She gave her life to Christ. And he's just got countless stories like that. But so when I say complex, it's a vast setup that they've got there. And he would say, how on earth do you resource this incredible vision, Bill? Well, we teach tithing in our church. That's honestly his answer. Now, fundraising has its place. I do think that. Let me give you an example, though. I think fundraising works most effectively when you're actually tapping into the resource of people beyond the church rather than asking your own people just to give more. Let me give you an example of this. I used to be at Narre Warren Baptist Church, and we used to do this fundraiser called the Fox Road Festival every year. Well, it became known as the Fox Road Festival. And we used to open up our property. One of the things we used to do was people were told any furniture or stuff you want to sell, get rid of, bring it in, as long as it's good condition, bring it in. we'll sell it and that can go towards the building fund. So a lot of people would do that. We had a fantastic arrangement with the Salvation Army because the last thing in the world we wanted was a bunch of furniture sitting around the property after the day. So they had an agreement. They would come in and take whatever we didn't sell. Some of it they'd throw, some of it they'd put in their stores. And also we had farms not too far from the church. So we literally had traditional hay bale rides, pony rides, and obviously the normal stuff, face painting, sausage sizzle, all that sort of stuff. Now, the chap who was running this, he'd often stand up after, funds were collected, and he'd say, "We raised $10,000. Now, the treasurer and the board, we knew that wasn't really true. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what we knew was people gave, on average, every month at Narre Warren Baptist, about $10,000 into the building fund. That was just normal. Now, when we did the Fox Road Festival, we'd only get about $2,000. So what we knew people actually just did was a lot of them just gave. Instead of giving to the regular building fund, they put their money into that event. But the 2,000 probably did come from the outside because about 1/3 or more of the people who came did come from the outside. You see what I'm saying? That's why this Bunnings thing is really good, because we're actually tapping into the resources of people beyond the church. And that's when I think fundraising is important. I'd love to see our church do these regularly, but it is a case of committing to it. We need help, to run them. And we were actually pretty blessed because initially, when we submitted the application, we were simply told, no, we don't do religious organisations. That was a straight answer. Praise God. The girl working there who said that, though, is a Christian. And she thought, I'll have a think about what we can do. Well, we managed to work it so they were willing to do the youth. So that was a bit of grace there in God's hand. But yeah, no, it'd be great if you guys can help out with that. Fantastic. All right, let's look at another passage. Nehemiah 2:11, it says this. I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. I had not told anyone what my God had put on my heart to do for Jerusalem. Isn't that interesting? So he's organised all this documentation and stuff, given it to the people so they have access to all the any sort of resources there in the Persian kingdom in that region near Jerusalem. But he hasn't let his people know, the Jewish people, know anything about what he's doing as yet. They know he's coming, and the surrounding nations would have known he was coming because he's an important official, but they didn't know why. And I find one of T.D. Jakes' messages on visionary leadership interesting. One of the things, he's an African-American preacher, and one of the things that he says is that, sometimes visionary leaders short-circuit the effectiveness of their vision because they cast the vision too soon, when people are not yet ready to receive it. And so in other words, I think Nehemiah knew he wanted to pick his time to cast that vision with the nobles and the leaders and the priests and the movers and shakers of the Jewish people. Can I make this point? Number 3, the effective leader knows when to share the vision. The effective leader knows when to share the vision. Next portion of Scripture, 2:13 says this. By night I went through the valley gate towards the Jackal Well and the Dung Gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem, which had been broken down, and its gates, which had been destroyed by fire. Then I moved towards the Fountain Gate and the King's Pool, but there was not enough room for my mount, that's his horse, to get through. So I went up the valley by night, examining the wall. Finally, I turned back and re-entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I'd said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or the officials or any others who would be doing the work. You get an idea what he's doing? He's even gone under cover of darkness. And I would say that's got a lot to do with he doesn't want the other nations to know that they're about to rebuild this city, because their attention would have been alerted to the fact that he's come, but they don't know why he's come. He went under cover of darkness. He doesn't want the other nations to know what his plans are. He thoroughly examines the walls and the city. And so then, of course, when he comes back to talk with the nobles and the leaders and the priests, the movers and shakers of the Jews, he knows what he's talking about. Can I suggest this? The effective leader knows how to research the vision. The effective leader knows how to research the vision. Let me give you an illustration about this. Many years back when I was a young adult, Pamela and I were newly married, didn't have kids or anything, and we were commissioned to plant a church in northwest Sydney. And as we set about that, needed to do some research. And so one of the things I did was print up some demographics. Particularly, I did the whole city actually, but I particularly wanted to look at the two shires that were associated with what we were going to do. So there's Baulkham Hills Shire and Blacktown Shire, because the church was going to be kind of western Baulkham Hills, but it would certainly attract people from northern Blacktown as well, because it's right between the two shires. So demographic research is helpful stuff. It tells you the religious breakup, it tells you the age group breakup, it tells you what salaries people are earning, it tells you, even has a bit of psychographic research in there too, what people are thinking about various things, where they work, all sorts of stuff. So a whole bunch of information there. So I read up on that. Now, one of the things that was interesting, as we dug into this, we noticed that there was a concentration around where the church was to be planted of dinks. Yeah, seriously, dinks. I know some of you are thinking, Lee, you shouldn't have had that third coffee this morning, mate. You're speaking gibberish, man. You're speaking gibberish. Dinks, yeah, seriously. It's an acronym that was used quite a bit at the time. What does it mean? It means double income, no kids. Double income, no kids. And there was heaps of them in that area. And the concentration was interesting because a lot of them were people that had moved into the area because they were looking at buying homes there. There were some beautiful homes that were being built in the area, lots of homes going up in the area. And really, I think what a lot of them were doing, they wanted to save up and buy their dream house. And so in many cases, it might be their first home, or they might be renting a small place in view to buy another one, or bought a small place in view of buying one of those homes. But the idea was they're putting off having kids for some time because they want their dream house. And so a lot of these guys were going to be working for a while. Mostly people in their 20s and early 30s, some married, some living together, that sort of thing. They became our target group. So one of the other things about research, demographic research is extremely helpful, but face-to-face research is really important as well. Rick Warren did it when he planted his church. So we developed a series of questions, and we're not a church yet. We're just a little team of people meeting in my lounge room. That's all we are. And we went door to door and did some research, especially myself, but there was others involved as well. And what did we ask people? Well, our first question was a little bit of an icebreaker in some ways. We said, what sort of music do you listen to? And that often would get people talking. That's a pretty easy thing to answer, isn't it? And so they would. And what we found in the area, people were listening to R&B dancey stuff or listening to Triple M rock stuff. So it was guitar-driven stuff and dancey stuff, kind of the funky groove stuff and guitar-heavy stuff. So that was helpful. Why was that helpful? Well, that would actually guide us to what sort of music we should be using on a Sunday morning. Second question we asked was, what do you think the community needs are in the area? I've got a variety of answers to that, but one of the things that we discovered is a lot of these young couples, they'd moved from an area they used to live, where they'd grown up at school and family and all that, they'd moved out to the northwest, and they were actually looking for community. They felt a sense of isolation, a lot of them. They were searching for community. So we knew that is a felt need for these people. And I remember there was a new model that came out of Germany to evaluate churches called natural church development. Our church was evaluated 5 times, 5 years back to back. Our highest score every time was loving relationships. So we'd made that a priority in the way we set up that church. Another question we asked people, getting a bit spiritual now, we said, why do you think a lot of Australians don't go to church? And that was an interesting answer as well. Now, most people gave an answer along the lines of busyness. And actually it was probably pretty reasonable too, because a lot of these people were working often in the CBD of Sydney. They'd try and miss the worst of the traffic, but there'd be an hour and a quarter to work, hour and a quarter back home. They worked long hours, they earned good money, but they worked hard. And they said, look, on the weekends, you're trying to catch up with shopping and mowing the lawns and stuff. It's just busy, People don't go to church because they're just too busy. But they gave another answer as well, which was probably catchier. Why do you think a lot of Australians don't go to church? Oh, church is boring, man. Church is boring. And you'd unpack that a bit and you realise they'd gone off with grandma and a few times and been to a church that sounded pretty traditional, and they thought, oh my goodness, who would go to this? It's so dull. So that was important to know. Another question we asked was this then, and we had to tease this one out a little bit. If you were to turn up to a church, what sort of service would you be looking for, And we'd have to unpack that a bit because they often weren't very familiar with the concept of church and what happens. And what we started to pick up from people, they wanted something friendly, they wanted something casual, they wanted the music certainly to be lively, and they wanted the teaching not to be boring or hellfire and brimstone. They wanted something practical and life-related. And we managed that casual look because actually the way we set it up was coffee tables. People walk in, there was coffee tables everywhere. And so you'd come and sit at a coffee table, a little group of 5, 4, whatever, around a coffee table, looking towards the stage. But we then moved on to the logical next question was, well, if you were to go to church, and often they'd say, well, I probably wouldn't go, but if you were to go to church, what would you like spoken on? And we gave them a chance to talk about that. And so very often people would say something about Jesus. I want to know what Jesus taught, I want to know about Jesus' life. But the other ones that were most popular were all very life-related. A lot of people ask this question about relationships, healthy relationships. How do you do relationships? All that sort of stuff. Because a lot of these young couples living together or married, they loved each other, but their relationship could be a bit rocky. Another one they would state was stress management. Because they worked long hours, they travelled a long way, they had financial stress, so they mentioned that. In fact, another one was financial management. But remember I mentioned isolation? Another was overcoming loneliness. And another one was healthy self-esteem. They were the top ones. And then finally we'd ask them this. Well, if you were to go to church, what would be the most convenient day and time? The vast majority said this. Well, I still want my Sunday sleep in, but I guess, 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock would be okay. That'd be okay. I'll still get my sleep in. So we made it 10:30. You got the idea. Now, what do you do with all that information, though? What's the point of it if you're not going to do something with it? So then we developed a flyer. And the flyer was a dude kind of sitting like this, leaning on his hand, looking bored, saying, church is boring. Underneath that, it said, it doesn't have to be that way. And then we had our logo and slogan. Our logo was New Horizons. It's kind of the sun coming out over hills. New Horizons Baptist Church. Discover the difference. Then you flick it over. And over, we said, look, we've been chatting with people door to door. We've been doing some demographic research, and we realised the people in this area, if they were to go to a new church, this is what they want. And we said just a couple of sentences about the sort of things that I've been mentioning there. So we described that, the modern music stuff, friendly, casual, life-related teaching, all that sort of stuff. And then to prove that we had life-related teaching, what did we feedback? The top 5 ones they'd said. We did Life and Teachings of Jesus, a different series, but the other 5, making good relationships better. Stress management, overcoming loneliness, healthy self-esteem, financial management. All the dates were listed. And of course, down the bottom, when the church launch was, time and place. And because people didn't use GPSs at this time so much, we had a map down the bottom of the flyer. Now, what I learnt when I've done church growth is it talks about various ways of advertising for churches, and like any forms of advertising, they are effective, but they're only effective if you put a lot of money and energy into it. And so what I knew from the research was a flyer gets a 0.1% response. There might be 1% of people interested, but only 0.1 do anything about it. What does that mean? For every 1,000 flyers, 1 person turns up. Now, so what we ideally needed to do, because we wanted 100 to turn up, we needed about 100,000 flyers. No problem printing up that many flyers, but the issue was having them delivered, because it was fairly expensive getting them delivered. When you're talking those sort of numbers, we couldn't afford it. So we did 30,000. We had 30,000 flyers go out. And predictably speaking, that's exactly what happened. About 30 people came to check out the church. But that was enough to get us started. You got the idea. By the way, I found over the years, very different thing when you got a Christian, because this is just a company, when you got a Christian praying over the mailbox in the house and they're stuffing it in, the brochure or pamphlet or whatever it is, it's 10 times more effective. I've seen that through years of experience. It's 10 times more effective when it's a Christian delivering it and praying over that house. Anyway, a little bit of an idea of what researching a vision can look like. All right, let's move on. You might be asking yourself, why was the city of Jerusalem in such a state? With all the walls broken down and the city demolished? You know, what had happened? Well, let's read about it. 2 Kings 25:8. It says, on the 7th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, an official of the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the command of the imperial guard, broke down the walls around Jerusalem. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, why did God allow that? Well, let's find out. Look at 2 Kings 24:2. The Lord sent I'm going to say Babylonian, Aramean, Moabite, and Ammonite raiders against him to destroy Judah, against the king. In accordance with the word of the Lord proclaimed by his servants the prophets, surely these things happened to Judah according to the Lord's command, in order to remove them from his presence because of the sins of Manasseh and all he'd done, including the shedding of innocent blood, for he had filled Jerusalem with innocent blood, and the Lord was not willing to forgive. Now what we find, even after Manasseh, the next 4 kings of Judah are all godless men who do nothing about trying to follow the word of the Lord. Jeremiah the prophet is preaching to the kings. He's trying to say to them, the Lord has made up his mind, you're going to have to go in exile. But if you surrender, the city will be spared, the people will be spared if you surrender. They would not surrender. They didn't listen to the prophet Jeremiah. Important to listen to the prophets. So that's why Jerusalem's in such a state and the walls. Nehemiah 2:17. Then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and we'll no longer be in disgrace. I also told them about the gracious hand of my God upon me and what the king had said to me. They replied, let us start rebuilding. So they began this good work. So Nehemiah now cast the vision. Now, a lot of the things you've got to realise when we're reading the Bible, it's simply a summary. I mean, we don't want the Bible so big, you need a truck to carry it around, so God had to summarise lots of things. I imagine Nehemiah probably spoke for an hour or so and cast vision. He talked to accurate reports about the state of the city and create a need. They realised, oh my goodness, I didn't realise the city was as bad as what you're saying. And then he reveals the hand of God and says, look, the Lord has been with me. We have access to all the resources we need to rebuild this city. Anyway, by the end of it, they've bought into it. Can I suggest this? Number 5. The effective leader inspires people to believe the vision. The effective leader inspires people to believe the vision. Nehemiah 2:19 says, but when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard about it, they mocked and ridiculed us. What is this you're doing? You can picture them mocking them as they're trying to get the building started. And then they asked, are you rebelling against the king, King Artaxerxes? I answered them by saying, the God of heaven will give us success. We, his servants, will start rebuilding. But as for you, you have no share in Jerusalem or any claim or historic right to it. See, notice how Nehemiah just stands firm there. The God of heaven is going to give us success. We will start rebuilding. Nothing you guys are going to do is going to stop us. Now, who are these fellas? Well, Sanballat was the governor over Samaria. And it's not so much he cared about whether or not it was rebuilt or not, but he's thinking he's been governing this area for some time. He's thinking if it's going to be rebuilt, I'm going to be the one rebuilding it and I'm going to maintain power here. Tobiah the Ammonite was probably the governor over Ammon, and by marriage a member of an influential Jewish family. Geshem the Arab was a leader of quite a powerful group of Arab communities. And, got to realise a rebuilt Jerusalem was a threat to the authority of the Samaritan officials who had been in charge of the land ever since Judah's exile. You got the idea? So they don't really want it rebuilt. And just think about it in the New Testament, nearly 500 years or so later, the big rift between the Samaritans and the Jews? Well, some of it stems from this. The Samaritans resisted greatly the rebuilding of Jerusalem. Can I suggest this? Number 6, the effective leader is not deterred by opposition to the vision. The effective leader is not deterred by opposition to the vision. One more point. Nehemiah 3:1-5. We're just moving into the next chapter. It says, Eliashib the high priest and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, rebuilding as far as the Tower of the 100. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section. The fish gate was rebuilt by the sons of Hassanah and laid its beams and put its doors and bolts and bars in place. Meremoth, the son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section, and the next section was prepared by the men of Tekoa, and so on. And one of the clever things that Nehemiah did, you notice he's got the priests sorting out the sheep gate. Well, that's where the perfect lambs would come in near the temple. He gets the people to build sections that have a priority over. Anyone who had the ruins of where they used to live, that section of the wall, he'd get them to build because he knew they would build that properly because they don't want their section of the wall to be the weakest because their house is behind it, And so he strategically got teamwork happening, and it's remarkable. They built the whole thing in about 50 days. It's quite extraordinary, actually. Number 7, the effective leader mobilises teams to achieve the vision. The effective leader mobilises teams to achieve the vision. Let's have another look at the pick of our lineup of people from last Sunday, if you weren't here. So about 16 different ministries represented there, and it was encouraging. There was quite a few people did choose to get involved in areas they're not currently involved in, which is excellent. I'm just going to make a mention. He's filming at the moment. I'm just going to make mention. Look how neatly that is all set up. The black tablecloths, chairs all lined up, and very neat, isn't it? Looks cool. Looks professional. Benjamin did that because I know Benjamin talked about cleaning and stuff, but Benjamin does a heap of setup as well, and he does it extremely well. Why are those flyers on your seat? Because Benjamin put them there, does a heap of work like that. But it takes various people getting involved in the vision, this teamwork, to build the kingdom of God, and of course that's often expressed within the local church. Let me just go through these 7 points again. The visionary leader receives a vision from God. 2, resources the vision. 3, knows when to share the vision. 4, knows how to research the vision. 5, inspires people to believe the vision. 6, is not deterred by opposition to the vision. 7, mobilises teams to achieve the vision. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, yeah, but Lee, I'm not a leader, mate. Never will be, mate. I'm not a leader. I'm just not a leader. John Maxwell, who's probably one of the most famous guys who writes all manner of books and runs courses on leadership, he says this: leadership is influence. Leadership is influence. The fact is, all of you have influence over some people, and that's the place you can exercise leadership for the glory of God's kingdom, for the building of his local church. And by the way, Nehemiah did not just rebuild the physical walls of the city. You get to chapter 8, and there's an extraordinary national revival, this mighty move of God, where the nation comes back with enthusiasm and passion to be servants of the one true mighty God. Well, let's close with a word of prayer. Thank you, Sue. Let's be upstanding as we also prepare to sing the Lord's praises.